Do you wish that all things wealth and finance were much easier to understand and not presented by a bunch of beige cardigan-wearing geeks? Welcome to the Clever Investor Podcast, where we're dishing up the easiest to understand finance program served in bite-sized chunks, so your brain will thank you as your knowledge grows. Hosted by the brilliant Owen Taylor, a multiple award-winning expert with a glorious knack for explaining the complex world of wealth in the simplest of ways.
Hey Clever Investors, and welcome to another show. So over the last few weeks, we've had the Reserve Bank of Australia move the cash rate, and you can see previous shows about what the Reserve Bank actually does and what the cash rate actually means. And now we've got the flow-on effect then that banks are then starting to move up their interest rates. And there's going to be a bit of a marketing game that all of the banks and the other providers play with, trying to make the other ones look bad and trying to make themselves look brilliant. As my top tip was always, don't panic on these things. But I've got to admit, as a property investor myself, there is then the adding together the numbers as to, well, am I going to have to start putting money in towards this property, or how much is it going to cost me? The most obvious thing and the largest source of income and holding costs against our property is the rent. So what's happening to rent? Well, interest rates are then rising, because whilst the bank can put up my interest rates each month, I can't go and put my rent up each week, can I? Because my tenant's in a contract for 12 months, 6 months, whatever. So I thought I'd get my friend and really the country's leading expert on the rental and the leasing market. I thought I'd get Helen Matsoukas on the phone. I've known Helen for many years and she's greatly admired within the industry. And I put this question to her.
Hello, this is Helen.
Helen, it's Owen.
Yes, Owen. Hi, how are you?
I'm good, but as you know, I'm a property investor. Now, should I, in your opinion, from the rental side of things, should I be worried about the effect that the cash rate rises and therefore my bank's going to put up the interest rate on my investment mortgages? Should I be worried about my ability to hold this property then? Because I can't put the rent up next week.
Well, when we look at interest rates increasing, it is that perception is straight away that, interest rates are increasing. That means I'm going to be more out of pocket, and I'm not going to be able to rely on my rent to help me, narrow that gap, or at least, be able to pay, what my out of pocket's going to be or what the increase is going to be. But right now, we're living in such a unusual space where the interest rate increase is not going to. It shouldn't actually affect your rent. The issue of holding a property or having an out of pocket at all, because right now we're actually in, and I'm sure most of your viewers would know by now that we're dealing with what's called a rental crisis, which means that the rents are increasing, and that's not because of interest rates increasing, not the sole cause. It's actually a number of colliding factors, and I, in a short answer, would say to you, absolutely not be worried. As you would know, and a lot of our clients know, they get stress tested when they go into this investment space. So our investment property specialists, they put all their numbers, all our clients' numbers together and stress test them to ensure that if an interest rate hike was to happen, that they would be ready for it. They would be able to still be able to manage it based on no rents increasing. And now we're actually in a position where we're actually seeing rents increasing quite rapidly. I think it's not even going to make the interest rate increase an issue for investors. To be honest, I think you're good.
So when you said that we've got a rental property shortage, how's that happen?
Yeah. Well, there's a few colliding factors that are happening at the moment, and this is all started back in 2019. We can blame COVID, of course, but and that was probably where it kind of kicked off. We went into this phase where, a lot of developers have shelved a lot of projects across the country, which means that a lot of new builds and a lot of projects are not going to be completed. So that's happened because of the labour shortage, materials shortage, all of that kind of space it's just not happening. So where we had, I think it was back in something like 2016, Melbourne, for example, had something like, 45,000 dwellings being completed in 1 year. And now they're estimating something like 5,000 over the next 3 years. So, the supply is very low. And when supply is low, that's what drives demand. Then there's obviously a higher demand, which then drives rents to go higher. It's predicted, especially in Melbourne, in the Melbourne market, which is what we're always looking at with our research as well. It's predicted that the average will be a 5.5% increase in rent year on year for the next 3 years. So, dollar value for someone that's, currently got a rental property at $400 a week, in 2 years, their rent's going to increase to $45 a week. That's an average. We're actually seeing it now that increases of $50, $60, $70 is happening, in one rental increase. So there's all these different colliding factors. So the low supply, the low supply is definitely what drives the rents to increase, and that's what we're going to have, and we're going to have that for the next few years.
I suppose one of the tips I always used to give people when I was doing the numbers for them to buy investments is to never do your numbers on a weekly or even a monthly basis, but to look at things on an annual basis, because I think it takes a lot of the fright out of when you're putting your numbers together. And so many people forget about the tax advantages, not just against your income, but also against the depreciable value
property.
of the property as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's something that, we definitely, we work all our numbers on. And like you said, it's an annual thing, because you do have to take that into consideration when you are, when you do become an investor, because it is massive. It definitely helps you hold your property over the year and helps you, service that property. So, it's they're all these little takeaways there. It all goes together with, with making sure that you can manage, having that investment property, and it's working for you, which is what you want it to do.
So it's probably a time to review who's managing your property.
100%. Yes. If I had $1 for every client calling or friends telling me that they haven't increased their rent, or they don't even know when was the last time they increased the rent, or if their tenant's on a fixed term lease or anything like that, I'd be a very rich woman.
So another thing that I hear from friends that some of them I've helped put into investment properties, and some of them have got their own, is they feel a little bit of guilt when they're told that they should put the rent up. What have you got? Have you got anything to say? Like, how can you help them to get over the fact that they shouldn't feel like that?
Yeah. Look, you're an investor and I'm an investor as well. And I battled with this, especially because, my tenant actually, he lost his job during COVID, and luckily for us, we were able to give him some assistance. But now, when I look at, I've got to look at it as a business decision, and and I am trying to, you do feel guilty, because you do have to, put that extra pressure, or we feel that we're putting that extra pressure on the renter, because you are going to increase the rent, and we're talking substantial increases. We're talking $20 plus a week, where I'm a mum, I've got kids, I know what $20 to them sometimes looks like when I take them to the shops and say, here's $20, go and play or do something. And then you think about that and you kind of go, well, can I manage this? Can I carry the risk of not increasing my rent? But then what if I get stuck? Or what if, so yeah, I mean, the guilt is going to always be there. It's there with anything, I guess. But, I think renters now are, well educated enough to know that, everyone's feeling the pressure. We're all feeling the pressure financially in some way or form. And, the perception is that landlords are these rich people that just sit back, collect rent and, sip cocktails on the weekends. That's just always been the way. They don't actually realise that they're sitting down with an investment property specialist. They're basically going through, they're scrutinising their numbers. They're trying to build something for their future. And as a result of that, they are buying a property to rent out to someone so that they can help them pay that mortgage. So I think if people understand it that way or take it on board on that way, thinking that I'm doing this for my future so I can help, my family, there's options for them. I think it's just an easier way to kind of absorb it and kind of take it on board. But I think if look, financially, if you can, do minimal increases, definitely let your tenants know that. But again, if you have to increase the rent, I think, again, the communication needs to be through your property manager so that the property manager can effectively communicate to the tenant and say, look, your landlord's extremely happy with the way you're keeping the property. Unfortunately, they're looking at what's available in the market and where everything's at and what they need to do in order to, to deal with all the increases that are happening around us. They're going to have to increase the rent. I mean, the reality is that tenants are so aware at the moment. They know exactly what's coming. They're very well educated. They know that there's a low supply. So I think a majority of them would make that decision to go, okay, well, I'm just going to take this rent increase. And you know what? The legislation's there to cover them if they think that, an increase is too high, because there's that side of the scale too where you do find landlords will jump on the bandwagon and go, we'll increase the rent by $100 a week, and that's not necessarily the right way to do it. So, everyone's protected as such. So I don't want people to feel bad about it.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's what we want to talk about on this podcast is sort of the balance of both sides. And I have heard from, people over the years where their landlord, and most of the time, in my experience, is when the rent for somebody has gone up by an exorbitant amount, it's often when the owner is managing the property themselves and probably not giving themselves the best advice.
Yeah. Yeah, I would think so. Well, in their eyes, they have. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and then it comes back to bite them, to be completely honest, because the legislation is so strict and so stringent that, everyone has an opportunity. I mean, any landlord that increases the rent to a ridiculous amount, they need to justify it. So, they have to, and not by justifying saying, well, you know what, I need to go on a holiday and I won't be able to afford my mortgage because I'm saving for a holiday. They need to justify in the sense of saying, well, this is market rent. I've reduced the rent to deal with the effects of COVID. Now I'm increasing the rent. I'm giving you the required notice, and my property is available. The rent that I'm asking for is the same as what all the other properties around me are available. Now, if you don't have that proof, then you're definitely setting yourself up to fail, because that just won't get increased. And then you're basically you've got a tenant now that's aware of the landlord perhaps taking advantage of a situation, which is, never good, because that tenant's just going to keep on going back to, the VCATs or the QCATs and, make that argument every time.
I think from my point of view, whenever my agents have told me that, they recommend the rents going up, they give me the justification, and my goal is to try and keep the same tenant. If the tenant's been good, then I'm not going to be silly with pricing my property out of reach for them and sort of risking not having a tenant for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know a number of landlords. One in particular, which is our general manager, Natasha. She won't mind me mentioning this, but she's got a fantastic tenant that's living in one of her properties in Brisbane. He's incredible. He keeps the property extremely well. Gets it professionally cleaned. Doesn't the place looks brand new, and I think it's like 5 years old or something. For Natasha, that's important. So her rent increases have been very minimal, to the point where I've said to her, you need to increase the rent. It's below what it should be. But for her, it's more important that there's less wear and tear on the property, that she's got the same tenant. She's not now, she's been, if we look at it and, did an exercise and say, over the 5 years, if you changed a tenant every year, had 4 to 5 weeks changeover, vacancy in between, and, but increase the rent, where would you be? You probably wouldn't be that far ahead, but that was important for her. So she was happy to keep the rent consistent, with slight increases, just not where they probably could have been. She's probably, 50 to 60, actually $50 to $80 behind a week where she probably should be. But that's because she preferred to keep the same tenant because he looks after the property really, really well and knows that he's going to be there long term.
And I guess that sort of underlines the thing that I've said quite a few times throughout the podcast series, is that the rent is only ever there to help you hold the property. You don't create your wealth off that weekly rental income.
No, absolutely. It definitely needs to hold the property, and service the property. Yeah, for that long term, it's our, what we talk about all the time is our exit strategy. Making sure that we buy the right property, and we're doing all we can to ensure that we hold it for long term to reap the rewards at the end. So yeah, absolutely. I agree with you.
Thank you, Helen, for your time. You're so what you don't know about the rental market could be written on a pinhead with a pneumatic drill.
Thanks, Owen.
All right.
Have a good day.
Thank you, and I'll pick your brains again on another podcast.
You have been listening to the Clever Investor Podcast, proudly sponsored this week by Blue Wealth Property. Are you ready to start a new investment journey? Get in touch with the industry leaders, Blue Wealth Property. Blue Wealth have a proven track record in using research to identify growth markets, and Blue Wealth have supported thousands of Australians to buy the right property in the right market at the right time. Go to bluewealth.com.au.